Hello and welcome back to Prism and Company. On the docket today, the Supra Oracle. This is the guidebook, but we will be taking a look at the deck soon by the lovely company Uusi. And if you are not familiar with Uusi, it's to CJ apparently. We have the artwork by Peter Dunham and written by Liena Gates. I'm going to assume I got those correct. Oh my goodness, though. This is so lovely. Just like, this is my first Uusi product, and as just like printed objects, oh, it's so good. But I'm not here to talk about the quality of the deck because I could, and it's amazing. I'm here to talk about this deck and why it really spoke to me. Because I am not a fan of Oracle decks. There, I'm gonna say it. That is my hot take. But something about the Supra Oracle really spoke to me. And it took me a while to exactly figure out why. Now, on the surface of it, there is an aesthetic component that I really love. Just the design of this deck I find particularly beautiful, which always helps. But art alone is not enough for me. And that's coming from someone who really loves art. I am a systems man. I love being able to dig into a set of cards and really kind of unwind them and unravel them at the seams and see where choices were made and break things down. And many times, Oracle decks are a little bit more freeform than that, and they're designed to be, and I think that's really cool. They're designed to be more intuitive tools, or I almost think of them like an ocean, and like it's a deck that kind of ebbs and flows and waves in a very organic way, and then has all of this free space for you to swim and explore. Where a tarot deck, boy, I should have prepared an analogy ahead of time, is more like a book, where like an old tome that's maybe ciphered. So like all of the letters have been changed to a different symbol, where it's very structured, but you still have to like dig into it to figure everything out. And then you can like write in the margins. So there's still like room to work, but it's much more tightly structured and compact because, you know, if you say it's a tarot deck, you kind of know what to expect, and there isn't a ton of deviation from that. Weird analogies aside, that openness is usually what takes me out of an Oracle deck. I like something where I know the bounds of. That way I know, you know, what the sandbox I'm playing in is, so I can get in there and root around. So the thing that caught me, like I said, was the artwork. But the thing that really hook, line, and sinkered me, hook, line, and sinker, is that a thing? I don't know. Yes, it is now a thing. I christen it a thing. The thing that's really hook, line, and sinker to me was this deck's refusal to be consistent. And I mean that with the most respect I possibly can. But as I looked through the images, I began to discover that there were so many outliers, so many small little things that kind of tweaked me in a very interesting way. Because at the heart of it, I love the imagery, I love the feel, I love the look and the vibe. But as I started to poke around, I noticed there were things that did not make sense. And it wasn't things that were seemingly loosey-goosey or freeform. They seemed like deliberate choices, and that gave me a sandbox somewhere where I could get in and explore and unravel, and that was the systematic overlay that I craved. All right, that accent started as something and then just got into like total weirdness. Now, it's not systematized. Boy, get ready, y'all, because I'm apparently making up all the words today. It is not systematic in the way that, say, a tarot deck is. Tarot has 4 suits, and each suit has 10 cards and 4 court cards, and there's 22 major arcana. There's very specific criteria. This deck does have chunks and sections. We'll go over those in the guidebook. But each little bit is subversive. And that is the word that I really wanted to get to today. And I can't believe it's taken me, 4 minutes and 30 seconds to get there. But subversive is the word that I would use for this deck. In every little way, in each little part of this deck, there is something that sticks out and is like, what the heck is that even doing there? And those are the things that I want to look at today. What about this deck is subversive? What little parts don't quite fit? And why do I find that so very fascinating? Oh my goodness gracious, enough preamble. Let's get into the cards and take a look at some of these individual elements and see what what they mean. The first bit of subversion I want to talk about is the theme of this deck. Now, the guidebook describes this deck as early medieval Gnosticism meets Jungian psychology as kind of a loose basis. And like you hear that and you're like, what? And it's amazing. There is a real kind of like theme to what lots of Oracle decks, try to capture. There's big like archetypal categories like angels or affirmations, like positive statements about yourself, or kind of like deep, vague emotional space. And I use vague in the best way here, just like a deck that would give you like wildly spiritual pictures, but like just the images to allow your subconscious to kind of like dig into and root around. But this is based on, medieval spiritual practices and a psychologist, like those ideas sort of incorporated and mixed into one. And that to me is awesome. That was the first thing that I was like, ooh, that feels a little subversive. Like this deck is really going for something different. And that in and of itself could have sold me, but I love all the other little bits. And as I was looking through these, some of these inconsistencies, some of these little subversions almost feel like mistakes in some way. But then there are so many of them and they seem so kind of like subtle and smart that I'm like, I don't know about that. I think there was just a little bit of flex built into this deck to allow you to sort of root around and experiment a little bit. One of them I will show you now, and I'll be curious to see if you can pick up on it. So let's just take a look at some of the cards first here because they're totally beautiful. And then by the time I'm to the end of this stack, I'll be able to make my first subversive point. Sageness, air. So as we're looking at these, we can see these beautiful black and white images on this kind of tea-stained, almost aged-looking paper. And everything feels very hand-drawn and like pressed almost, as if it was like a press with ink. And I think they actually did make like letterpress prints of all of these things. Now, as I'm flipping through here, one thing you might notice is that all of these cards have a single keyword on top or title. Things like potential or imperfection or daemon or nothing, release, threshold, anima, mysticism, aether, forgotten, sensation, improbability, magic, thinking. I'm going to go through this whole deck because it's so dang pretty. We're going to go this way though. Perseverance, sincerity, earth, seeker, intuition, manifestation, primordial, animus, synchronicity, individuation, except for two cards, the hidden and Deus Ex Machina. Now, first of all, the fact that there's a card called Deus Ex Machina in this deck blows my mind. Talk about a Deus Ex Machina to have this card in here. Actually, that's slightly non-thematic, but like Deus Ex Machina, if you're not familiar, is Latin, I think, for God from the machine. And it's this idea of kind of like a very unsatisfactory ending to a story where like God imposes or circumvents a situation and just like solves the problem. Like, something swoops in and finishes the day that you couldn't expect in any way, which is kind of cool if you think about it from like a storytelling perspective if you're in it. The idea that like this God could come and save you somehow from a volcano. But from like a storytelling perspective, it's often very narratively uninteresting. So that's just a fascinating little card of tension I find from an information standpoint. And the other one is the hidden. And these are the only cards in the deck with multiple words in the title. Every single other card has just one single keyword on it. Deus Ex Machina makes perfect sense because that is a Latin phrase. So like, it's not that they're adding in more words, they're just referring to a specific type of idea, but it's still subversive because it has more than one word. And the hidden, this is the one that really is like, all right. Because let's just imagine this was hidden. Hidden to me is different than the hidden. Like that's a different concept. So you really are gaining something different by saying the hidden as opposed to hidden. If I'm thinking hidden, I'm thinking of maybe my own thoughts that are hidden, or I am hiding. I am, hidden from something. The hidden is an other. It is something hidden from you. It is the thing that is hidden, the hidden. And so it's taking that kind of personalness away from it and making it something else. And I think that's really, really cool. But it is flexible enough where you could say the hidden are your thoughts or your emotions or something. And even on the image here, we have something being hidden. We don't know what it is. It's kind of covered up by fabric, but that is the hidden. So there is just one card really that needs the word the in front of it to make it something different. And it's just very subtly different. Whereas all of the other cards have a single keyword on them. Totally wild and super cool. And that is just the first of many things where you're like, why does that card have a the on it? Because if you were to look at this deck like this, if I were to only show you 4 images, and I showed you, as I stack them up, the hidden, Deus Ex Machina, individuation, and synchronicity, you'd be like, oh, so it's like a tarot deck. Like, you know, there's some keywords in there, but there's like some the titles, like the Fool, the Emperor, the Moon. And, you know, oh, there's Deus Ex Machina there too. But no, that's like a super small little chunk because as you go through, it's literally all one word after that. Now, to anybody who owns this deck, you're probably screaming at the screen right now, like, there are more than, you know, or there's other titles in this deck besides 1 or 2 keywords. And that is these cards, which have no titles at all. Now, these are subversive for different reasons too. Obviously, the colors on them. But even within that, there's some subversion, so we'll talk about that more. But there are even more subversive cards that have no titles on them at all. And cards that don't even have this second line. So they really are structurally, like compositionally, kind of different, not only from the color aspect, but also from the line. And of course, the titles too. Totally interesting. This makes me think of, you know, why did they choose to include titles on some cards and some cards to not have titles? Because from the book, these do have titles. This is Heavens, this is Destiny, Being, Unfathomable, Phenomena, and Terra Firma. So why not put those on the cards? It's so dang interesting. I think that's very, very cool. So like whenever I'm seeing something subversive in this deck, immediately my brain goes, why is it different? What information can I pull out of that? And I'll be honest, I am still working through some of that. So that is not exactly what we're going through in this video. I'm more interested in just pointing out the subversions. Boy, I find this infinitely fascinating, and I really hope this is interesting to you guys too. Let's take a look at our next little bit of subversiveness. Now, there is one thing I want to talk about related to names that is a little subversive, but not in the same way. So before we were looking at single names, or single word names, excuse me, as opposed to multiple word names, and how those multiple word names were a little bit subversive. But, and this is the thing that really gets me, even within the consistency of single names, there's a card that I find a little bit subversive, and that is this card, Oracle. Now, the reason I find it odd is because this is an Oracle deck. This is almost the name of the deck in a card in the deck. This is an Oracle card, and it's a card named Oracle. It's almost a little bit too on the nose, but like, what a friggin' cool idea to have as a name of an Oracle card, Oracle as a card. It's even confusing to say. And then also from an image perspective, like if you think about an Oracle, often an image that comes to mind is like, you know, someone you go see who like sits in a quiet room and like sees your future, or throws bones and casts them, or even like a tarot reader. That kind of image often comes to mind. But this is like a giant pluming storm cloud. It's super intense and fierce. And I think that's very fitting for a card like Oracle. But I just find that name to be like a little too cheeky and cool to be overlooked. So even within the individual single names, I'm like, you kind of jump out because it's almost self-referential to the deck. A nice little cool thing in there. Another thing I really love about this deck are the meanings behind the cards. And I did get the guidebook to go along with it because I heard someone just read one of these meanings and I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. I think this is going to fit. We'll see. If not, fine. These cards, though, are the first ones in the deck. And these are our materia prima, our classic elements. And now, right off the bat, you can see that one of these cards is a little bit subversive in its illustration, and that is fire here in the center. But we have all these hands kind of reaching away from it, which is very cool, except for Aether, which breaks the friggin' mold and it has hands coming in the opposite direction. Why are these hands not on this side on Aether? So they're all coming away from Fire, who is in and of itself a different hand. It's not reaching from the sides, it's reaching from the front. That's so weird. Like, what the heck is going on? So that is a subversive element within the images. But even from the meanings, these are subversive from what you might expect if you're a tarot reader. And I am coming at this from the perspective of a tarot reader. So let's take a look at air, for example. Boy, these are hard to pick up. If you think about air from a tarot deck, you're often thinking of ideas like thoughts or ideas, the intellectual realm, which is very, very cool. But if we were to take a look in the path of an oracle here, let's find air. I went a little bit too far. Air. Our keywords here are motion, subtlety, life, invisible, touch, and sound. It's literally talking about air. That's so, excuse me, boy. For a little emphasis, I decided to burp. That's so freaking cool. This card called air is not referring to air as an idea. It's referring to literal air. Air is subtle, but full of motion. You can see it and it breathes and it moves. It breathes life into us literally. Air is invisible. Air is something that you touch and sound travels through it. And there's this beautiful, almost flowery, poetic language to go with it too. But I think that's so neat that they didn't take the obvious approach of just sticking with a kind of classical interpretation. They went actual classical to like what the element itself is. And that's another reason I got the guidebook, because I could, intuitively read this deck or kind of dig into it that way. But I want to know all the weird little ways that this deck was intended to be read. I want to read this as invisible and sound. Like, what does that even mean in the context of a reading? I don't know, but I'm so excited to try. Every time I've read with this deck, the message that it presents is so wildly different in tone than what I get from tarot that it just makes me extremely excited. Like, if I'm going to buy a new tool to work with, in this case a deck, I want it to be a unique tool. I don't need two hammers. I need a hammer and a screwdriver. And this is my air pressurized tire gauge. Clearly, I know nothing about tools, so take that for what you will. But all of these elements are, we'll come back to Aether in a second, are very much classical in that way. Like, earth talks about literal earth, like hardness and sensation and like being tactile. Fire talks about, fire is like history almost, like something to illuminate the dark and take you through a path. Nothing about inspiration or passion, which you might expect from a tarot deck. So cool. This depiction of fire also really works for the meaning as well. Water is all about like receptiveness and the ability to break things down and absorb, and it like just feels like water. It's so cool. The Aether card, which is like the first card in the deck, is really interesting though, because a lot of times like this symbol will mean spirit, kind of like above meaning below. Aether is often referred to as just like that nebulous void of like spirit, kind of like the fifth element. But in this case, it's talking about Aether as seen through a more classical scientific lens of just like all the stuff in the world that we can't really see. Like this, I'm not super familiar with Aether, but the idea of like, I think it's like magical stuff or just like physical stuff even that exists in space and just fills up space. And, it's since been disproven, but the idea that it's in a modern deck of cards is so cool. Like, just the idea of the other stuff, that there is something that we can't see or comprehend that wouldn't fit nicely into the classical elements. From a modern perspective, I almost think of something like Bluetooth. Like, you could fit it probably best into air. I think that's where it would fit. But this idea of like an invisible something else that's out there and kind of weaves things together. or just the idea of the internet. It's not any one specific thing. It's all these servers and all this information and movement, but like the idea of it is Aether. That is modern Aether. And that is in and of itself so cool. So we have very subversive meanings in these cards. Oh man, picking them up. And then we also have two very subversive images. One of them being, where'd it go? Fire. It is the only card in the set of these 5 that doesn't have 2 hands coming in from the side. And then Aether, because we have all of these hands reaching away from fire, except for Aether, which is reaching back towards it. And again, I don't necessarily think that was a mistake. I think that was like a really, really interesting choice because in many ways, Aether is outside of these other 4 elements. Just gorgeous. And can we just like look at this for a second? Even with the ultra simple nature of just these images, things like the fabric dripping off of the hands on the water card, or these very sturdy, tight bracelets on the earth card. Or, you know, this like very tactile fire coming off the fire card. It's so cool. Just all these little teeny tiny things. The space in between these 2 bracelets on the air card as, you know, giving the arm visual space, just like air is filled with space. And then nothing on the Aether hands, just bare skin. So cool. So neat. Love these guys. But just like little tweaks of like, I wonder what's happening there. Kind of weird. The next section I would like to talk about is the organization of this deck. Now, I just put the deck in order because there is an order in the guidebook here, but it's kind of interesting because a lot of it is a little bit vague. The order of a tarot deck, for example, is pretty obvious because it goes numerically. Each of the cards are numbered, but none of the cards in this deck are numbered. They have names, but no numbers, and sometimes no names because it's subversive. But if we take a look here, there are 3 distinct sections. We have Materia Prima, we have the Hidden Path, which goes all the way down through here, and then we have Sacred Geometry, which is right at the end. So we have, and it kind of looks like we have another section here, but this is what's called a plate, or one pressing of an image, you know, even several images together. Actually, let's take a look at that plate because it's really, really beautiful. That one is 55, I believe. Oh, there it goes. Past the gold page. So here we have a plate called The Secret. This is 4 different images put together. I'm going to talk about these in a second too because, oh, look at how gorgeous that is. But even though we have an order, there's not any rhyme or reason that we know of. I fully believe that they put these in a specific order for a reason, but they don't tell us what it is. And that drives me nuts. It's one of the things about Oracle decks that I actually find very frustrating. It's like, tell us, give us any information about why you put these things in this order in the first place. Materia Prima makes perfect sense to me. Aether is kind of like this otherness, and then air is the most up element. If you don't know what I mean by that, like if we look at the symbols here, air is a triangle pointing up with an arrow, then fire is an arrow pointing up, then we go down, down with an arrow. So we're going from the highest to the lowest, and then Aether is kind of outside of that. So it feels like a perfect way to start. And then the Hidden Path starts with nothing, which is kind of cool. We'll talk about that card too, and then just sort of like flows into its own thing. And this idea of structure, but lacking, I find interesting. That feels a little bit subversive in that it's like teasing you. It's saying that there is something here, but you can't really know what it is. And the fact that it's called the Hidden Path is very like cheeky, especially to someone like me who craves that structure. Calling it the Hidden Path makes me think that there's a path there. I just got to find it. So I'll be wading through this like a blind man in the woods for the next, 6 years, trying to uncover its secrets. And I'll probably come up with some narrative or something. I actually really look forward to that. But I find that a little bit subversive. And one of the cards I just called out in that last section was the Nothing card. And what an interesting card. All of our cards have something on them except nothing, which has nothing on it. And I guess you could say that nothing has something on it. It has nothing, but That feels a little subversive to me. And I'm not upset at this card or anything. It's not like this card took any, okay, I'm going to say it took any effort. What I mean by that is not conceptually to come up with it, but like, it's not like they wasted time on this card. So I'm not like, oh, why didn't they include another illustration? Because it's literally nothing. But they chose very deliberately to use a card slot on this. So they wanted this idea in there, but it didn't take up any of their time to draw it or not because they didn't have to. And how bold is it to include a card with nothing on it? Like, especially in a deck that is so beautifully illustrated, like there's probably a visual way to represent nothing, but they obviously chose not to. And I'm not like blown away by this card because from a card perspective, it's not very impressive, but from a reading perspective, from the angle that this deck is coming from, it's so cool. If you draw the card nothing in a reading, that's a very powerful idea. Nothing can be freeing and scary and really, really big and really, really small. The universe is mostly full of nothing, for example. Or having nothing is tiny because it's literally zero. Like there's so many interesting ways you can slice and dice this card. But it's just one card that doesn't have an image on it. But this is kind of a cool part. And as we go, you'll see that there's like refractions in this deck. All of these little subversions are not like, it's not like this card is like the subversive card that has all the things. It fits in many ways. It has the double lines on top. It has a single named title. It falls within the structure. There are many things about this card that do fit. There's just this one big glaring thing that doesn't really fit, which is that it lacks an image. These cards are so slippery that they're just like flowing all over the place as if they were water, flowing across a stream. Ew. And they're also very challenging to pick up. Let's look at another subversive thing, shall we? There is an idea in card reading called using a significator. And the purpose of a significator is to represent the significant, or the person receiving the reading or doing the reading, depending on how you're reading. Let me stop saying the word reading. Let's say, for example, you and me, right now, we're doing a tarot reading, or we're doing a reading with the Supra Oracle, the thing that we've been talking about. I could find a card that represents you, and I could use that in all sorts of ways. Maybe I would lay that out on the table as just kind of a visual indicator that this is you. Let's say we use this card, the Seeker. You are you seeking information. Or I could maybe shuffle this into the deck, and whatever cards are in front of and behind the Seeker might be in your conscious and unconscious mind. It's pretty cool, like the idea of being able to use a significator in the deck. So I love that idea that there is one in the Supra Oracle, or two. Seeker and Self. I mean, they're stunning in their own regard. And they do offer different views. Self is obviously you. Seeker is, someone seeking answers. But like, you could be seeking answers. You could be the seeker. So in some ways, you almost don't need these cards. But besides the fact that there's two, which is in itself a little bit subversive, the thing that really gets me is back in the book. Because let's take a look at the very, very end here. Seeker and Self. There are keywords for the significator card. And maybe this is just me. I'm honestly not that familiar with Oracle, like I said, but to me, the idea of having a significator that has keywords on it is just totally wild. These cards are designed to be read as a standalone card, but then they also have this ability to be used as a significator card and just represent the person. That feels totally wild to me. Like, these cards are unique in that they have this kind of double function to them. And sure, many cards could be read as, say, a significator, but these are like, it's very difficult to not read the Self card as a significator for yourself. Like, that feels pretty on the nose. But the idea of self in Jungian philosophy is important. So it is a psychological concept on top of that too. And I just love that. The fact that they have these very cool psychological meet modern card reading terms that have like all this weird overlap. To me, those feel a little bit subversive. It's so funny. The word subversive is losing all meaning to me at this point because I say it so many times. And it really is like blowing this a little out of proportion because they're just, small little minor things that kind of don't necessarily fit the mold. And they're really more just acting as subversive elements or subverting expectations more properly. But I just love saying it. Subversive. Oh, look at how subversive it is. Let's take a look at these guys next. These are the last 6 cards in the deck known as the Sacred Geometry section. Here we have Unfathomable, Phenomena, Heavens, Terra Firma, Being, and Destiny. And these are so cool because they all contain color, unlike everything else in the deck. Oh wait, this card's black and white. In the section specifically dedicated to color, we have a card that is completely black and white, and next to literally any other card in the deck, if you didn't know, you wouldn't be able to tell was any different, except for the fact that there is no title on top. So even within this set of cards designed to be the colorful geometry cards, we have a very subversive card because it is black and white, and that to me is hilarious. I just absolutely love it. Taking a look at this set, we have a lot of consistency happening throughout it. And obviously it does fit in every other way. There's a single hand in some way supporting, through wire or mystical means or whatever, a shape, but it's the only black and white one. I just love that. The other one that strikes me as a little bit out of the bunch here is this guy, Being. Every other one of these bits of these Sacred Geometry cards have these extremely even lines all the way through. And, Terra Firma gets a little bit wavy in there, but all the lines are very nice and even. I don't even know how they drew that. That's like a friggin' miracle to me that they could get that many perfect circles evenly spaced. Bravo. But this one is like so much more detailed and has a lot of very different line weights to it. It almost looks as if we have folds in this shell. It's really beautifully rendered, but it has such a different feel and vibe from all these other cards. And I think that's so weird. Like, why not make this shell made of all these really samey lines, like the same line weight, the same rendering, the same application? It feels much different on this card, which I find very, very interesting. And then I suppose this card is actually different too because we can't technically see the line because it's just black. And that's stunning, by the way. And this card being called Unfathomable is like unfathomably cool. Pardon the super lame pun, but that's where it's at. So even within this very succinct set of cards that are very different from the rest of the deck, there's still weird outliers in them. Like, let's remove this one for a second. How much more of a set does that look like? They're all these brightly colored cards, or even the idea of white, just, something different than this kind of beigey gray in the background. And then within the set, it looks correct, but then within the context of the deck, I'm like, ooh, you stick out, son. I love it. I think that's pretty darn cool. These cards I find really interesting for lots of reasons. It seems like these are maybe a stretch goal or something from a Kickstarter because the guidebook entries are shorter. They are in a lot of ways very much different from the deck, obviously with color and things and no names. But they're in there now, so they are a part of the deck purposefully, and we have to take it for what it is. So we just get to kind of dig in and get a little extra juice out. And, when you draw some cards and all of a sudden the blue Heavens card comes out, or, insert any of these cards, it's such a cool little pop of color, and it's so appreciated, and there's so few of them, and it's so rare that it's always an absolute delight and surprise. Can we just look at that for a second? Oh my God. Heavens, let's go on. I feel like I'm losing the plot here a little bit, but I'm just subverting your expectations with the flow of this video. The next one I want to talk about here is The Secret. The Secret is created by 4 separate images that all obviously fit together to create one totally stunning whole. Like, oh my God, we have a labyrinth here with all of these hands and beautiful fabric, each interacting with the fabric in a very different way. Some of them even interacting with the labyrinth. And the cool thing is, which is like what everybody does when you get this deck, is they make the labyrinth with the cards because it's depicted. So you have thinking and feeling and sensation and intuition. And I'll get it kind of as much in the frame here as I can. And the thing that cracks me up, and it feels almost like a joke, is, oops, I have these backwards, is that you can't actually make the labyrinth. There is borders on all these cards, and I could overlap these a little bit to get them closer, but I can never make this full image until I actually trim the cards down. And one of my friends on Instagram recently trimmed these cards and could actually make the labyrinth, and oh, it looks so beautiful. I'm not brave enough to do it yet, but it's so pretty. But this feels really like, you know, they're going to give you this beautiful image that's like one piece and then not even let you do it. Like, they kind of trick you into thinking you can because you can get this close, but these images are never actually going to touch. They're never going to be that one beautiful plate that you want them to be, because there's always this separateness. And there's good reasons for that. Like, borders exist on cards for a reason. For example, shuffling. Like, cards will last so much longer if the images don't go right to the edge, because it is so difficult to tell when just plain paper gets damaged as opposed to black ink chipping off of a page. You're like, oh, well, obviously this is ruining itself. But on this, it's going to take forever before I can notice any wear and tear. So I'm a border proponent in many ways, but it can do hilarious things like take the idea of a super awesome, beautiful image and break it apart so you can't ever really truly get there. And this is still stunning and very beautiful, and I'm glad we can even get close. But this is still kind of subversive in the way that it's presenting, because you don't always get all four of these cards together. In fact, you basically never do. Let's take one image, for example, thinking. And just looking at this, as images, these are really weird because most of the page, most of the card is taken up by a labyrinth that is drawn in a very different way than many of the other cards. Let me grab the deck here. Let's see, let us take Moon, for example. We have all of this scenic stuff happening. We have bear, sure, a bear over here. Is that like a rock or a turtle? I don't know, something. And we have darks and lights and, you know, a whole scene happening just like we do over here. But like, imagine if, you know, half of this moon card was covered up by a labyrinth. You'd be like, what the hell did you stick that labyrinth on there for? And out of context, it makes no sense. In context, it's like the coolest thing ever. But there are four of these images that almost lose something because so much of the image is taken up by this, like, gimmick, I'm going to say. Like, it's an amazing gimmick, and Labyrinth is such a beautiful way to depict these four concepts together. But you have to know it's there, and out of context, it seems a little off and a little bit odd. That being said, like, you can feel this person feeling the fabric. Like, that still feels very sensational. It feels like sensation. Thinking is like this person presenting you an idea. They're wearing the fabric like the robe of a sage. Like, they really worked in a lot of meaning just with the hands and with the fabric. But imagine if they had the whole composition to work with. I think that'd be really interesting too. And, you know, what if they included more of these things in the deck? Like, what if they were to include more images that maybe side by side, like maybe Moon and whatever, Sensation, made like a panorama? Like, why not include more of that if you're going to do a little bit of it? Because this deck is crazy subversive, and it always wants to incorporate little things that are like, ooh, that's so cool, but why the heck is it there? Love it. Love it, love it, love it. I don't know how that came across, positive or negative, but I freaking love it. I think it's so cool. And this particular thing makes me really want to trim the edges off, but I don't think I'm going to do it because it scares me a little bit, and it just shuffles so nicely with all the cards in like perfect smoothness. Okay. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on. God, that was so bad. I want to friggin' re-record this section. Manifestation. This card, this single card, literally almost made me not buy this deck. Because look at it. Why is this in the deck? Like, the idea of manifestation, fine. It's very nice. But the rendering of this card is 100% different than every single other card in the deck. All of these cards have beautiful, small, detailed line work, extremely like refined and subtle and consistent. And then manifestation comes in and it's like, no, I'm going to be a thick, inky line that has very different line weights all the way around it. I'm not going to be particularly well crafted. Oof, boy, that was a little bit harsh, but like kind of I mean it. Like there's not a lot of evenness around the edge. Like why is that one little section much smaller than the rest of it? I think that little tail at the end is kind of charming, but like it's a spiral, so why is that not going in? And then like, why are these clouds rendered this way? These clouds are gorgeous, but they don't fit in with literally any other clouds in the deck. Clouds look like this in the Supra Oracle. They're smeary and they have context and they have all these lines in the background. These exist out of like nothing and they're just poofing in. There's no sky, there's just clouds existing. So this card, I've grown to like it. It's fine. You can tell I'm not super excited about it. And if this is like your favorite card, I'm sorry. Like it's cool and it's in there. But for me, it is so out of place. This is the one subversive element that I'm just like, no, no, why'd you have to do like something that loses the craft for me? Like there is, honestly, it's a compliment. It speaks to the rest of the deck that is so beautifully crafted from an artistic standpoint that the one card where they clearly, I don't know, didn't put in as much time or something into sticks out to me like a sore thumb. And that's just kind of a shame. I think in person, actually, it reads a lot better. On videos, for me, it really, really stuck out. But it's like, okay, I can roll with this in person. And it's part of the deck. And it's, you know, if I didn't buy the guidebook, I think I would just take this card out. But like, it's in the book, so I like want it to be there. Especially when I'm putting a deck in order, I like need all the cards to be there. But this is the one bit that I was just like, oh. And I hate to even bring it to this place and bring it down a little bit. So let's move on and bring it to a happier place because this is the only bit that I'm just like a little bit whatever on. Okay, on to different subversive images that I find significantly more successful. I promise we're all in good space now, or at least I am. I want to talk about Impasse and Forgotten. These are really interesting cards to me because they kind of don't fit visually, but in a different way than Manifestation. The rendering of these cards is very consistent with the rest of the deck. It's small and detailed and crisp, especially Impasse. But let's examine Forgotten first. Forgotten is kind of an outlier for me because of how gray it is. There is a really bright spot, obviously, with the sun, and there are very dark spots here with the octopus. But let me grab my little stack again here. Even compared with Moon, Moon has got some contrast to it. Again, we have an animal on the bottom. We have some bright solar body on the top. But this feels flatter and grayer. And that's not bad. It almost gives it more of that like forgotten feel. But it's just not dynamic. That scene feels stale and still in a way that these other ones do not. And I think that's pretty cool. It's like the one image to me that really jumps out and makes me think like, huh, that's like a really weird static image. Even the card called Stillness feels more dynamic to me than Forgotten. We have like this beautiful cloud movement and, you know, this little ship on the water here. Where this one, it feels stagnant and old and stale. I think that's so cool, but it's definitely a little bit different. Okay, moving all these off to the side. Impasse is the other one that strikes me as a little bit off. And not off, but subversive. Okay. And the reason being is that this card feels really flat to me. Even in a card like Manifestation, let's take, there's like a little bit of space in there. We have some clouds that are further forward and the clouds in back. That flower seems to have things in front and behind it, and it feels like there's a little bit of space and air to it. This is like the other card that feels the flattest, but in kind of a different way. Where this card feels like literally, boom, you know, just like brambles, branches. Oracle feels like there's a lot of space in there. And I just, you know, grabbed Oracle as an example. But it feels like you're looking into a composition where this is actively trying to keep you out of the composition, to keep you going off, which is extremely cool from a card meaning perspective. It's called Impasse. It's reaching an impasse that you can't get past. That's literally what this card is doing. but then just visually it looks very different. It looks like kind of an outlier. And that's so darn cool. Some might even say subversive. This one definitely got me as I was looking through this deck, because one of the things that is so striking about the Supra Oracle are all the hands. I can relate. It just, the hands coming in from off the page and interacting with objects on the inside. And sometimes, they're usually from the edge, but sometimes they're from the center, but they're always obscured by something. You can't tell where they're coming from because their source can't be seen. It's not like they're just disappearing, it's cut off. There's something about it in the view, like the clouds here in Gnosis, that is hiding in some way the visual representation of the rest of the body. You always know that it's going somewhere, except for in 2 examples. And it's kind of 1.5 examples. Because fire, we have a hand floating there, but it's still a little bit vague because we can't see the hand disappearing or the arm disappearing because the hand is visually blocking it. So I'm going to give fire a little bit of a pass, even though it's still very floaty. But then there's reawaken. We're literally seeing that hand disappear into the back. And I mean, holy crap, this is a stunning image. And it's kind of cool to have some differences. But why is this one card different? Why is this the one card where the hand is coming from the center and actively disappearing into nothing? It's as if that hand is reached in from the aether and is holding this little branch. And to me, that just feels like it's cool meaning. It's baking in a very different idea to this card than what we see in the rest of the deck, because the rest of the deck almost feels like we're catching something just in a moment, like spirit. It feels like we're imposing on this spirit and just catching them, putting this vase in, or maybe grabbing this vase away. With Gnosis here, it feels like we're watching this moment unveil itself, like this, I or this maybe deity or something is reaching down and bringing this book to us. But we're just like catching it happen in the act. It feels like we're catching this person bringing the shell out of the water or grabbing it back in. All these little moments where this one, it doesn't feel like we're catching, here we go, reawaken. It feels like that is deliberately there. It's just like, yeah, I'm just a hand kind of reaching in, but it's not like a snapshot that we're taking. This is the subject. We have focused on it centrally. The rest of it has just vanished away. And how neat is that? But again, I think that is just a neat element to this card, a wild little subversion to your expectations, and not necessarily bad. Very, very cool. So, what does all this mean? All this subversion, all of these little things that weave themselves through the Supra Oracle? I don't actually know. That's part of the reason I like this deck so much. I don't exactly know what to do with it. And I know how to, or I'm getting to know how to use it. So like from a usage standpoint, I know what to do with it. But I don't exactly know how to like categorize it or how to work with these little things that are throwing me off a little bit. And that I'm finding to be extremely inspiring. What a cool way to kind of like subvert my expectations and, help introduce me to new ideas or new ways to look at the images or the cards. And, every time I think I've got a grip on something, that's going to bug me that that's upside down. This deck surprises me in a way that I was not expecting. Oh, now I have a bunch that are upside down. Whatever, we're just going to keep going. And I think that's the reason that this deck has really captured me. The little bits of overlapping subversion that just constantly keep you on your toes and guessing. That coupled with ridiculously beautiful artwork. We're even going to leave those on top. They're ridiculously beautiful artwork. And just incredible, unique vision and voice. Totally lovely. If you are a fan of Oracle decks or even just, kind of like card reading as psychology, not even necessarily divination, boy, I cannot recommend the Supra Oracle enough. It has been so surprising and fun, and the more I look at it, the more these strange little things unfold for me, and it just makes me smile. So thank you, Uusi, for making such a cool product, and hopefully this was interesting. kind of pulling at some of the little threads on the edge of the Supra Oracle. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.